In the beginning, there was silence. Before the hum of starships and the councils of Jedi, before the Republic's banners stretched across the stars, there was only the whisper of the Force, raw, unshaped, eternal. It moved through the void like a breath, patient and unseen, watching civilizations rise and fall in the endless cycle of creation. From that silence, a small, green child was born, nameless, unknown, and destined to carry the burden of balance itself. The galaxy was still young then. Vast regions of darkness separated isolated systems, each ruled by its own fragile empires. Primitive hyperspace routes connected only the core worlds, and beyond them lay uncharted space, the wild frontier of the living force. Countless species struggled to understand the energy that bound all things, and many sought to twist it to their own design. On a remote and unnamed world, hidden from the maps of explorers, a species thrived in harmony with the Force's pulse. They did not build empires, nor did they seek conquest. They listened. They felt. And from among them came one who would one day become the galaxy's most enduring symbol of wisdom. Yoda's people were ancient and few, their lifespans stretching over centuries, allowing them to see the galaxy not as a battlefield of moments, but as a river of ages. They lived close to the soil, among forests thick with luminous vines and still waters that reflected the stars. The Force was not taught to them. It was the rhythm of their existence. In the song of insects, in the breath of the wind, they heard the same energy that would later guide the Jedi Order. For Yoda, it was not something to master. It was something to become. Even in his earliest years, Yoda sensed the difference within himself, a subtle hum, an awareness beyond sight. When storms raged across the skies, he would sit alone and feel their power not as chaos, but as purpose. He felt the heartbeat of the world beneath his small hands, and in its rhythm, he discovered peace. The elders of his kind saw it too. They knew the Force had chosen this child, not for greatness, but for understanding. He would be its listener, its servant, and one day, its messenger. Beyond that tranquil world, however, the galaxy trembled. The ancient Rakatan Infinite Empire had already fallen, leaving behind ruins that whispered of the dark side's oldest corruption. The Jedi Order, still in its formative centuries, sought to rebuild what the Force had torn apart. Scattered enclaves of Force users debated philosophy and purpose, some preaching freedom through passion, others through serenity. The line between light and dark was not yet clear. The Force was still wild, untamed, and in that chaos, Yoda's existence was a quiet miracle. The arrival of the outsiders changed everything. One day, streaks of fire cut across the horizon, a damaged transport vessel from the stars, its engine screaming as it fell through the atmosphere. The crash sent waves of energy rippling through the forest, and Yoda, barely into adolescence, followed the disturbance to its source. Among the wreckage lay two figures in brown robes, Jedi Seekers, traveling through uncharted regions in search of potential adepts. Injured and stranded, they felt the presence of the small creature who approached them. And in him, they felt something greater, a connection to the Force stronger and purer than any they had sensed in years. The meeting was quiet, yet monumental. For the first time, Yoda saw beyond the boundaries of his world, the promise of a galaxy bound by destiny and conflict alike. The Jedi offered him passage to Coruscant, to learn the ways of the Force among others like him. His people, wise in the way of cycles, understood that his path no longer belonged to their world. They sent him away with no words, only a shared silence that spoke of trust. For those attuned to the Force knew, the child would not simply learn from it, he would become one of its greatest voices. As the starship lifted from the canopy and vanished into the void, Yoda watched his home shrink into a distant speck of light. Fear touched him for the first time, the fear of leaving behind everything familiar. Yet beneath it was something deeper, something that felt like destiny. He felt the Force surround him even there, beyond the edge of atmosphere, and for a fleeting moment, he sensed it whisper through his mind, "You are part of the whole." The journey to Coruscant was long, spanning systems he could not name. He saw worlds ravaged by war and others shimmering with peace. He felt both wonder and sorrow, emotions that would later define his teachings. In the heart of the core, he saw the Republic for the first time, a civilization magnificent in its order, yet burdened by its own ambition. The Jedi Temple stood as a gleaming beacon above the city planet, its towers like fingers reaching for the heavens. To most, it was a monument of strength. To Yoda, it felt like a question, a challenge to remain humble in a place that worshipped power. As he stepped into its marble halls, the whispers of thousands of Force presences filled the air, so many voices, so many wills. The Masters observed him with quiet curiosity, uncertain of the small creature before them. But when he closed his eyes, the room fell into stillness. The Force moved through him like wind through ancient trees, and even the most skeptical among them felt its presence respond. Yoda's initiation was not marked by ceremony. It was marked by silence, the kind of silence that follows revelation. Thus began the first chapter of his 1,000-year journey, a life that would span the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of the Republic, and the endless struggle between darkness and light. Yet even as he began his training, the galaxy beyond the temple walls continued to shift. The Sith, though thought extinct, lingered in shadows. The seeds of pride had already begun to take root among the Jedi. And in the heart of a small child, far from the wars of men, the Force quietly prepared its greatest instrument of wisdom. In time, Yoda would forget the faces of his own kind. His memories of home would fade into dreams, replaced by centuries of service to the Order. But in the stillness of meditation, deep within his heart, he would always hear the echo of that first truth, the lesson born not in temples or wars, but in the whispering forests of a forgotten world, that the Force is not something to control, but something to become. And in that truth, the galaxy's smallest being would carry the greatest weight, to remind an age of warriors what it truly meant to be one with the light. The stars moved slowly outside the viewport, an endless sea of light, ancient and indifferent. For Yoda, each one was a question. Every flicker, a mystery. He sat in silence, small in form yet vast in wonder, as the Jedi transport carved its path through hyperspace toward the heart of the galaxy. Somewhere behind him, his world still turned beneath its emerald forests. Ahead lay Coruscant, the shining jewel of civilization, and the crucible where innocence would be tested, tempered, and forever changed. The Jedi who had found him spoke little during the voyage. Their minds were focused inward, their spirits still recovering from the crash that had brought them to his world. Yoda watched them meditate, their calm presence radiating like still water over fire. He could feel the energy moving through them, the same current that he had always known, but now it had form, discipline, purpose. To him, it was both strange and beautiful, the idea that something so infinite could be shaped by will. As the ship descended toward Coruscant, the sight stole his breath. The planet was not land or sea, but city, endless, blinding, alive. Oceans of light stretched across the horizon, towers rose like mountains, and airspeeders swarmed like insects between their peaks. It was both magnificent and terrifying. Yoda, born to forests and silence, felt the pulse of the world beneath him. A million beating hearts, a million voices speaking at once. The Force here was different. It was louder, heavier, shaped by thought and emotion. The galaxy's center of order was also its greatest source of chaos. The temple stood upon a mountain of durasteel, ancient and radiant, untouched by the restless city that surrounded it. Its spires reached skyward, 5 towers symbolizing the unity of the Force. But Yoda sensed the weight of its presence, not merely as a structure, but as a living being. The temple breathed. It remembered. Within its stones, the echoes of countless generations lingered, their triumphs and failures intertwined like roots beneath sacred soil. The moment he entered, the air changed. The halls were vast and silent, the floors polished to mirror the heavens. Statues of long-departed masters lined the corridors, their faces calm, their eyes eternal. It was here, in this place of reverence, that Yoda's journey as a student of the Force truly began. He was led through archways carved with ancient symbols, past meditation chambers humming with quiet energy. Every sound, every whisper of wind through the corridors, seemed to carry purpose. Among the hundreds of initiates, Yoda was different. His size made him seem fragile, almost insignificant beside the towering forms of other species. Many whispered that the Council's decision to accept him was a curiosity, perhaps even an experiment. But Yoda paid no mind. In his stillness, he felt something deeper than words, the same peace that once lived in the forests of his homeworld. He was not here to prove himself. He was here to listen. Training began at dawn each day. Younglings were taught to hold their minds steady, to listen to the Force as one might listen to the rhythm of rain. Some struggled. Others sought to bend it to their will, to summon visions or power. But Yoda approached it differently. When the Masters asked the young to lift a stone, Yoda lifted a leaf. When they asked them to still their minds, Yoda already was still. His strength was not speed or strength of body, it was harmony. The Force moved through him naturally, as if it had known his soul long before his birth. In time, the Masters took notice. The youngling who barely reached their knees began to speak in ways that startled even the most disciplined teachers. He questioned everything, not to defy, but to understand. Why did the Force choose some and not others? Why must peace be protected through conflict? These were not the questions of a child. They were the questions of one who saw the balance beneath all things. And though many found his curiosity strange, others sensed something ancient within him, an echo of wisdom that had yet to be spoken. Still, the Jedi Temple was not a place without shadows. Behind its serenity lay the struggle of those who sought control over what could not be possessed. Ambition whispered in the minds of the gifted. Rivalries grew. Even among the young, pride began to take root, the silent seed of the Jedi Order's greatest flaw. Yoda felt it all, and though he could not yet name it, he knew this. The greatest threat to peace did not come from the dark, but from within the light itself. Years passed in the quiet rhythm of training. Meditation. Study. Reflection. The days blurred into one another until Yoda's life became a single, unbroken prayer to the Force. He learned the ways of the lightsaber, though he preferred the art of stillness to the art of combat. He listened to the stories of ancient battles, but he was more fascinated by their lessons than their victories. Each scar in the galaxy's memory told him the same truth, that conflict was the shadow cast by fear. One night, as he sat beneath the temple's highest spire, Yoda felt the Force in a way he never had before. It called to him, gentle yet absolute, pulling his thoughts beyond the city lights into the infinite dark of space. He saw flashes of what was to come, wars fought in the name of peace, empires born from good intentions, and a galaxy forever balanced on the edge of chaos. And through it all, he saw himself, small, enduring, guiding others even as he carried the weight of failure. It was too much for his young mind to understand, but it left an imprint on his soul, a promise of the destiny awaiting him. By the time he stood before the council for the first time as an apprentice, he had already begun to change them. His words, soft but deliberate, reminded the masters of truths they had forgotten. That strength meant nothing without compassion. That mastery of the Force was not domination, but surrender. Even those who had doubted him began to see that the child they had brought from an unnamed world was not a curiosity. He was a mirror. Through him, the Jedi saw themselves reflected, their hopes, their fears, their potential for both greatness and ruin. When the meeting ended, Yoda walked alone through the temple's gardens, beneath trees that had been grown from seeds brought from 1,000 worlds. He listened to the whispering of the leaves and felt the hum of the city beyond the walls. For the first time, he understood that the Force was not confined to temples or masters. It lived in all things. It breathed through the galaxy like wind through the stars. That night, he whispered to the Force a silent vow, that he would dedicate his life to understanding, not controlling. To teaching, not ruling. To balance, not victory. And somewhere in the unseen currents of the Force, the galaxy seemed to listen. For in that moment, the smallest of beings began the path toward becoming its greatest master. Greatness does not arrive in a single moment. It is carved, slowly, painfully, through centuries of trial and reflection. For Yoda, mastery was never about power. It was about the courage to understand weakness. Centuries passed in silence and service. The boy from an unnamed world had grown into a being of profound stillness, his eyes carrying the weight of ages. Within the temple, generations of Padawans rose and fell, masters came and went, and still Yoda remained, a constant presence, as old as the marble beneath the Jedi Council's feet. Yet for all his wisdom, his journey was only beginning. Yoda's life was not defined by battles won, but by lessons learned. The galaxy changed around him like the turning of seasons. Old threats faded, new ones emerged. Trade guilds rose where empires once stood. The Force shifted, whispering of balance and warning of arrogance. And through it all, Yoda sought understanding, wandering from one edge of the Republic to the other, following the faint call of the living Force wherever it led him. In his early missions, Yoda discovered the true heart of the galaxy, not in the marble towers of Coruscant, but in the quiet places where no council's influence reached. He walked among the farmers of Corellia, the merchants of the Outer Rim, and the exiled Force sects that had splintered away from the Order. Everywhere he went, he saw the same truth, that the Force was not the property of the Jedi. It flowed through the hearts of the humble as much as the halls of the wise. There were times when Yoda's compassion clashed with the rigidity of his peers. Many of the older masters saw the galaxy in terms of order and control. Light must dominate dark, peace must silence chaos. But Yoda began to see the flaw in that thinking. Light and dark were not enemies. They were reflections, each revealing the other. He began to teach that victory over darkness could not come through denial, but through understanding. The Force was not a weapon. It was a mirror. His approach confused some and unsettled others. A young knight once asked him why he refused to strike down an enemy who had turned to the dark side. Yoda's answer was quiet, because the enemy I see is not him. It is fear. The council took notice of his growing reputation, not just for his wisdom, but for his empathy. His missions often ended not in bloodshed, but in peace. He resolved disputes that armies could not. He converted warlords through reason and patience. Where others brought fire, Yoda brought calm. He began to embody what the Jedi were meant to be, servants of balance, not enforcers of ideology. Yet even Yoda was not free from struggle. The more he learned, the more he saw the limits of the Jedi's understanding. Their order had grown proud, secure in its hierarchy, blind in its rituals. The temple, once a place of learning, had become a fortress of doctrine. When Yoda returned from distant worlds, speaking of new interpretations of the Force, the elders dismissed him with polite indifference. To them, tradition was sacred. To Yoda, tradition was only sacred when it served truth. It was during these years that he took his first Padawan, a young, headstrong being named Nkata del Gormo, who challenged Yoda's every lesson. Teaching became his greatest trial. He learned that knowledge could not be given, only awakened. His Padawan's doubts mirrored his own, a reminder that even wisdom must be questioned to remain alive. The bond between master and student deepened, not through obedience, but through shared humility. There were moments of darkness too. A mission to the war-torn systems of the expansion region forced Yoda to confront the cruelty of life beyond the Republic's protection. Entire civilizations crushed by greed, slavery, and fear. The Jedi Code offered few answers for such suffering. It was then that Yoda began to meditate not on victory, but on endurance, on how the smallest act of compassion could hold back the tide of despair. And slowly, his legend began to grow. World spoke of a wandering sage no taller than a child, whose voice could calm soldiers and whose silence could humble kings. To those lost in anger, he brought stillness. To those consumed by ambition, he brought reflection. To those who had forgotten the light, he reminded them that it still lived, even in the darkest corners of the galaxy. Within the Order, Yoda's philosophy began to influence a new generation of Jedi. He taught that mastery was not achieved through control, but surrender. That the Force must be allowed to guide, not commanded to obey. He reminded his students that the galaxy's greatest truths were not written in the archives, but felt in the heart. His teachings became a quiet rebellion against the growing arrogance of the Council. Yet, even as his wisdom deepened, so too did his solitude. He watched as friends aged and passed into the Force while he remained. Centuries became his companions, and silence his confidant. The galaxy changed faster than he could hold it, and he began to see the tragedy of time, that to live long is to lose much. But Yoda accepted this with grace. To him, death was not an ending, but a return. A part of the same balance he had spent his life defending. One evening, as the twin moons of a distant world rose above him, Yoda meditated upon a vision. He saw a future steeped in conflict, armies of light and shadow clashing in endless war. He saw the Jedi standing tall, yet hollow, consumed by their certainty. And he saw himself, ancient and weary, still teaching as the galaxy fell apart. The vision left him trembling. For the first time, he felt the sorrow of one who understands too much. When he returned to Coruscant, the Council asked him of his journey. He simply bowed and said, "Much to learn, we all still have." Those words, humble and direct, would one day become the very soul of his teachings. From that moment forward, Yoda's life was no longer about learning. It was about guiding others to learn for themselves. He became a living embodiment of patience and restraint. When conflict called, he listened first. When others sought to act, he counseled reflection. To the impatient, he was a mystery. To the wise, he was the answer the galaxy had always needed. And so, the small child from a forgotten world became the galaxy's quiet master, not by conquering his fears, but by befriending them. In a universe obsessed with power, Yoda's greatest strength was his acceptance of weakness. His wisdom was not born from certainty, but from doubt embraced with grace. For in the end, true mastery was never about the light defeating the dark. It was about learning to stand between them and remain whole.